Okay, Barbara, we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Or if you're in Australia, good morning. What a treat it is to see Anna Downs again. We had a wonderful time talking about her first book, The Safe Place, when it came out last year. And it was set in France. And now we have The Shadow House, which is set in Australia. But Anna, there are some common features to both your books. You seem to be drawn towards places, communities, or estates that you can describe. And you also seem to be fond of young women who basically are rebooting their lives for one reason or another. You think that's a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, yeah. I've been thinking about it, and I wonder if it's the same for a lot of, new or relatively new authors, in that your second novel tends to be quite similar to the first because you're still writing some things out, because quite often you start your idea for the second novel while you're still writing your first. So I think there is a lot of the safe place in The Shadow House. Like you said, the protagonists are very different, but they are rebooting their lives. When we meet them, they are at a kind of a state of crisis where they're trying to change things for the better for themselves. They're in a bit of a cul-de-sac. And yeah, the setting very much, I think I'm always, as a consumer of stories, very drawn to isolated settings, unusual settings, and interesting communities. With The Safe Place, there was just a small cast of characters. In The Shadow House, there's a very large cast of characters, and there's a lot of people in there. And it is much more a community, whereas, in The Safe Place, it's a very small community of about 4. But I think there are some issues that I was still working through and writing out in The Shadow House that have kind of continued on from The Safe Place. But at the same time, it's also a really different story. And as I said, the protagonists both are very different in terms of where they're at in their lives and what their priorities are.
Well, I think that's true. In The Safe Place is basically a family estate. It's, private, is enclosed, whereas the eco community, which we'll talk about here in The Shadow House, is designed to grow. It's larger, and it has a whole different dynamic, as Anna says, has much larger cast. But I have a question. Just before we started, Patrick's and my phones went off, not with an Amber Alert, but with a dangerous person alert, look out for the guy with the black shorts in the truck with the gun alert. And I wondered, do you have, one of the things that always fun for me to talk with our international authors, and we're talking with Anna in Australia, is to figure out, differences or similarities. So what kind of system do you guys have for public safety alerts and for child alerts?
Not that. I don't get any alerts that say look out for a man with a gun in a car. I've never heard of that. We do sometimes get missing persons reports, but I don't really have much of an idea about where they come from. I don't know if you have to be signed up to a particular thing or not. Like the other day, I got a message from New South Wales Police that said there's a guy missing in the next suburb over. Keep an eye out for him. This is what he looks like. But they're very rare, and so I don't really know where they come from or who sends them, or why a particular missing persons report would come to me at a particular time. I don't know. We get standard sort of disaster warnings. So at the moment, we're suffering terrible floods over here in New South Wales. Where I am on the Central Coast is not that affected, thank goodness. But we have just had 2 or 3 months of almost solid rain, and it's been a bit bananas. So, you get text alerts saying, extreme weather warning coming up. And with the fires in 2019, we would get alerts a lot. But I signed up for a lot of those. So I don't know how much of those are kind of standard and what is sort of subscription based. We don't sign up for these. There's something called an Amber law, creates the
I'm sorry, my internet connection may be off here. There we go.
That's all right.
An Amber Alert is for missing children. And, you know, and we get those. We get extreme weather alerts, as you say, we get, you know, flood or monsoon, or although they're called haboobs recently, that kind of thing. And when we were back east, am I still frozen, Patrick?
I think you muted, Patrick.
Patrick, we can't
There you
hear
go.
you.
Now you can. I was just, sorry. Yeah, you were frozen. It was a very pregnant pause there for a second.
I don't know what is going on. It's a strange day. Anyway, where was I?
I was gonna mention silver alerts too. Every once in a while, you'll see one of those.
Yeah. They call them senior alerts back east. We were just back there and we saw them. And they even now have them on, you know, the overhead signs on the
Yeah.
interstates. It'll say, you know, senior alert or whatever. So I think it's interesting.
What's a senior alert? What does that entail?
Well, I think it's, you know, maybe somebody who has dementia or Alzheimer's, or, you know, that gets in a car and gets lost.
Oh, okay.
Or wanders away, you know,
Yeah.
from here.
Yeah.
I think increasingly we're finding that has been true, that people who are, as Patrick says, you know, suffering from some form of dementia or whatever it might be, and they get loose and they can't take care of themselves. They can't find their way home. So,
and then
so
the community can kind of jump on board and try and find them. So do you get kind of a sort of a barrage of these messages? Because I would imagine that that sort of thing happens quite often.
Well, they seem to be localized. I mean, you know, I don't think that the Amber Alert for Phoenix is going to be showing up, you know, in Wichita, Kansas or whatever.
True.
And I think they're on the cellular network, so it must be your local providers. I don't know quite how it all works, and I don't know who sends them out. I don't know who sends out the Amber Alerts or the weather alerts, whether that comes, you know, from local weather. I think it's interesting, and the supposition is, which I find fascinating, that was just reinforced by a trip we made last weekend. The supposition is that everybody has a cell phone.
Yeah, I know. My dad doesn't have one. My dad still isn't, you know, he kind of started off, I guess, sort of 20 years ago going, no, that'll never be me. I'm fine with my landline. I think now he's finding it more difficult because obviously, you know, with QR codes and registration for things and, you know, digital banking and all that kind of stuff. I'm not actually sure how he's managing to run his life, but he doesn't have one.
It's almost impossible to fly without a cell phone because of all the, you know, the airline texting and also, you know, it takes a lot more. It used to be, you know, you could show up at the airport at the counter and they'd give you like a paper ticket or a cardboard ticket. And the worst thing you could do, which I did once, was, you know, you step into the bathroom and you'd put it down and forget it. And then you'd arrive at the gate with no paper. But now you have to go through this all complicated registration system.
I know. I actually went home to the UK just recently from Australia, which was very eerie and weird because it was actually on the day that the news broke of the Russia-Ukraine war. So not only was Sydney Airport completely deserted, but there were like reporters just running from kind of, you know, with these big cameras trying to make flights and, you know, it was a very strange experience, but I did that exact same thing. I went to the bathroom and I put down my document wallet and then I went to the gate and I was like, it's on the toilet roll holder. So I had to run back and get it. It was awful. I was very out of practice, you see. We haven't traveled for 2.5 years.
We all are, for sure. And I remember John Sanford saying to me, a lawyer that an author we're very fond of, that if he lost his phone, he was just going to kill himself because his whole life was in his phone and he couldn't do much. And I'm asking this in part as kind of a lead in to your community here in the Shadow House. You know, is it supposed that everybody has a phone? Are they frowned upon? What kind of community will it be if everybody has a cell phone?
Well, I mean, so I should say for anyone that doesn't know that the community in the Shadow House is an eco-village. So they are a community of people that are living relatively off-grid, but through my research into real life eco-villages, you know, I've spoke to a lot of different communities and a lot of residents. They're not as kind of off grid as you might think. They're certainly not anti-technology. And in fact, most of them would fail as kind of as communities, but also as businesses, if they didn't have technology. You know, so many, there's actually an eco-village just local to me, about 20 minutes down the road. And I went to visit them, and there's a lot of people living there who are working for, they're like Sydney work from homers. And they might commute now maybe once, twice a week. But they all kind of sit there on their laptops. They've got great Wi-Fi. They've all got their phones. Like they're a completely functioning community, but they're just trying to live more sustainably. So they grow their own food, and they build with sustainable materials, and they try and leave as small a footprint on the earth as possible. And it's actually amazing. It's you know, their sense of community and togetherness down there is really gorgeous. I did find myself spending time down there going, wow, you know, I could live here. But I'm quite a product of the individualistic society that I live in. So I'm not sure that the commitment that is required down there to be a joiner-innerer. I'm not sure I could do that all of the time. But in terms of how the two books compare, with The Safe Place, it was kind of, Emily did not have a functioning cell phone because of the signal there, and she was completely cut off and isolated. This is different. The people in Pine Ridge, they can leave, but they tend not to want to. They do have phone signal, but they tend not to want to connect with the outside world in the same way that we might expect them to. So they're not on social media all the time, and their priority is to try and encourage their children and their teenagers to stay off their devices. They have access to them, but stay off them. Let's go outside, let's play games, let's get in touch with the earth. They are quite wary of technology. Some of them are downright terrified of it. It's that sort of push and pull of embracing tech and embracing, the internet and all that comes with it, and also being frightened of it, that I wanted to explore.
Well, I think, it's hard for somebody my age not to think back to the communes, of the 1970s, in which family structures were very fluid. It was quite a different experience to live in a commune. It was sort of like a giant extended family. But in your eco-village, people are actually individual homes and individual families. So it is not a commune. And I think it's important to distinguish that. I wanted to say, it won't show up here, but in true kind of golden age mystery fashion, there is a diagram, a helpful diagram of the community. And so I referred to it several times, because if you're going to be in this kind of a setting, you need to orient yourself. I think Megan Miranda last summer wrote a book that was also set in, not an an eco-village, but it required a diagram, and it had a body of water, and it required for you to follow the mystery. You needed to know where everybody lived.
Where everybody is, yeah.
And I think it's so much fun, because, this is really a golden age kind of, device. If you go back and look at some of those early mysteries in that age, the 30s and all, they often came with maps, and you did need to orient yourself, and in order to work. The alibis could depend, upon access and egress and, all that sort of thing. So I was happy that your publisher did include a map. Did you do that yourself, or was that?
I did draw that myself, and I'm so happy that you've held it up. I'm always overjoyed when people mention the map, because there's sort of a funny story to it. When I was doing the copy edit for The Safe Place, the copy editor said to me, I'm struggling to kind of orientate myself on this estate and figure out the logistics of, you know, how long it would take Emily to get from the house to the pool, for example, and blah, blah, blah. So I drew them this map, and they didn't include it in the book, but it you know, it's very similar to the one that I've drawn for the Shadow House, and I have it on my wall. With this one, I sort of gave them one of the early drafts and did them a map to go along with it, you know, anticipating that they would want one at some point. But I did it very quickly and in front of the TV, and I was just kind of, you know, sketching it out, did it in pencil, then I went over it in pen, rubbed all the pencil out, and I just scanned it and didn't think very much of it. And then the publishers were like, that's great, we're going to use that, we're going to put that in the book. And I was like, what? No, I just drew it while I was kind of watching Ozark. You can't possibly put that in the book. And but they got a kind of a graphic designer to neaten it up a bit, and there it is in the book. So I mean, I'm delighted. I think it's wonderful. I'm so happy that there's my handiwork at the beginning of the book there. And I think you're right, you know, it delivers a much more immersive experience if you can kind of picture, as I say, the logistics of where people are and what they can and can't do.
So another echo of the golden age in The Safe Place and in the Shadow House is that you do have a closed community wherein, you know, whatever activity, whatever crimes or whatever you want to think about takes place. And that's, you know, that's a very sort of Agatha Christie country estate. It can be translated into anything. I mean, it can be a ship, it can be a theater, it can be a church, you know, but it's easier if there's a boundary around the action, so that the whole universe of people, if you had truckers, you know, going through this community and so forth, then it would be a different story. That's more of a thriller structure. But if you want to have this kind of a story, you do need to have a limited number of suspects and a limited access. And I love that, you know, it's still with us. I mean, it's 100 years old, but it's a design that it's a classic, you know, that's really held up. Did you find, Anna, when you were writing The Safe Place, you know, that was a consideration for you, that you wanted to contain the action?
Definitely. I don't think I ever thought of it quite in those terms. Like I wasn't thinking, oh, need to make it a locked room, you know, mystery a la Christie. I never thought quite like that. But I mean, it is a classic for very good reason. You know, like you say, you're preventing your scenario and your crime and your suspect list to be muddied by lots of people coming in and coming out. You know, you're preventing your cast of characters from leaving. But you also, you know, there's that wonderful sense of claustrophobia that permeates these kinds of books that tends to kind of light a fire under proceedings, which is really exciting. And so all of those things were a conscious decision, you know, particularly in, you know, the Safe Place, because of the nature of the plot, that had to be so, you know, they had to be in a place where they couldn't really leave very easily. And, you know, they didn't have any communication. The isolation is really key to The Safe Place. With the Shadow House, it is that you know, I had so many characters that I was like, we can't possibly have, you know, like you say, trucks coming in and out, delivery people, mailmen, you know, visitors. We can't be doing that. We can't have everybody leaving every day and coming back, because there does need to be that claustrophobia, and we sort of need to know where everybody is at every point. And I think, you know, this was my first, it's only my second novel, with a big cast of characters, and that logistically, that is just really hard to kind of wrap your brain around. So just as just to make things easier, you're like, I have to have a reason why people need not to leave. But the other thing is, you know, with these sort of estates and communities particularly, you know, you're looking for a way to present a certain ideology. I was very much so trying to do that with the Shadow House and Pine Ridge, is a group of people that are very much wanting to live a certain way. So then that poses problems for anybody that comes in from the outside or not. You know, a newcomer might dive in with both feet and be like, this is exactly what I want, but somebody else might question it. And what problems does that throw up? And how does it look to the person coming in from the outside? You know, what idiosyncrasies might there be? I often think that with these kinds of communities, we are quite suspicious of them. You know, as I was saying earlier, we live in a individualistic society. And so when we come across these people that are living so communally, we're like, what are they doing in there? You know, what's happening? What's going on? Surely something strange. So I was kind of, you know, trying to play on that as well.
Right. Not to correct you, but let me just say this. It is not a locked room. A locked room is an impossible crime. The point of a locked room is the crime. There's no way that that a person got in or out of the room. So
you're totally right. And I know that. I should have known that, because I am halfway through Solari Gentile's The Woman in the Library. I'm reading that at the moment, and she explains that quite early on, very specifically. She explains the locked room mystery. So you are right. I stand corrected.
Well, no, I wasn't correcting you. I was actually saying that for the readers. I'm glad you're reading Solari's book. I am actually the Barbara it's written for.
I know.
Yeah, we did that book together, and
you know,
I think she's just a remarkable writer.
She is, and she's a beautiful person as well. We've hung out a fair bit this last year.
She really is, but I'm very proud to have done that book with her, because I think it's amazing. I really loved the earlier one, Crossing the Lines, which I think had a different title when it was originally published in Australia. And I'm also very, very fond of her Roland Sinclair mysteries, 1930s, which are, you know, a sort of a fun modern look at the golden age, and you know, with interesting characters and a lot of fun. But I'll be really interested to see how readers respond to The Woman in the Library. Yeah.
Well, I'm loving it so far. It's very elegant and very kind of cheeky as well in a lot of ways. It's really fun. Well, really liking it.
I totally agree. Anyway, let's talk about Alex. Alex is a single mother of 2, and she's geared up to make a fresh start, and she's going to make her fresh start by moving to Pine Ridge, the eco village that we're talking about. So who's Alex?
Alex is a single mum of 2. She's British born, living in Australia. And she ends up in Australia because she goes traveling in her 20s with a boyfriend. And she's kind of backpacking, and that relationship doesn't work out. She ends up staying in Australia. She gets sponsored. And then she quite quickly, before that backpacker relationship falls apart, she discovers that she's pregnant, which explains why when we meet her, she has a 14-year-old son. She also has an 8-month-old baby from a more recent relationship. So all up, you know, she's got her hands very full, and her relationship with her 14-year-old is very rocky. She's really struggling to connect with him, which is heartbreaking for her, because they used to be this little team of 2, you know, them against the world. She's kind of going through that phase, which I think is, it seems to be quite universal, you know, that separation of child from parent, you know, their sort of fight for independence, and, you know, that them turning into their own person and defending their own right to protect themselves rather than be protected. And that's really difficult for Alex. And then she, you know, this difficulty is made so much worse by the fact that she's got an 8-month-old baby, which is, you know, beautiful, wonderful, joyful. She's very blessed. She's very happy with her baby girl, but her baby girl is not sleeping. And so a lot of the book is exploring what happens when you can't trust your own mind because you're sleep deprived, and you're doubting yourself at every turn, and also that chaos of parenting, particularly early parenting, where you just don't know what day it is because you're so tired, and the whole thing is so relentless. But it's also quite Groundhog Day. You know, you're constantly doing the nap math, and you're watching the clock for feeds, and you know, you're breastfeeding, and you're all of that stuff. And then to make things even worse, when we meet her, she is fleeing this abusive relationship, which is why she ends up at Pine Ridge. And so a lot of her arc is about exploring her relationship with her kids and her identity as a mother, but also peeling back the layers of her own life to identify and explain for herself certain patterns of behavior that have become quite common in her life, and which sort of have contributed to the situation that she finds herself in.
So what is the threat that she's fleeing?
So she's fleeing her current relationship, her partner, Stuart. She's been with him for a few years. I forget how many years I said in the book, but he's coercively controlling. So he's not violent to her, although the point at which she decides to leave, he has, for the first time, held her by her throat. And there are a lot of other contributing factors as to why she makes the decision to leave. But mostly he is coercively controlling, which means he manipulates her to the point at which she doesn't trust her own mind. She second guesses herself all the time. It's gaslighting, basically. He withholds her money. He cuts her off from her friends. So he's slowly whittling away at her self-esteem and her connections to the world and her independence and her ability to function as an independent human being. But in the first chapter, we see that, she arrives at Pine Ridge, and that's the situation that is presented, is that she has got away from this situation. She has some mettle, but also all her support networks are stripped away. And that's important for the beginning of the plot, that she doesn't have anyone to rely on. She only has herself.
So in a way, it's almost like it is like a safe house or a shelter in a way, but not with all the usual protections. I mean, she's trying to be anonymous. Is he the father of the baby?
No, he's not the father of the baby. He's the father of, yes, he is. He's the father of the baby, but not of the 14-year-old.
Not of the no, I understand that. But
baby's Cara. He's Cara's father. Yeah.
Right. So, that what in Australia, what would be his parental rights in a situation like that?
Barbara, I went over and over this. This was a really big thing in the book, because logistically and in terms of the plot, I was like, are they married? If they're married, what are the legal ramifications of that? If he is Cara's father, what are the legal ramifications, but also the moral implications? Can a reader support a woman that's taking her child from its father? For me, she's running from a highly dangerous and abusive situation. And later on in the book, it is made quite clear that Stuart does pose a danger to the children, and that he is not a nice guy, and that he has absolutely no intention of standing by them. So from that point of view, her actions are completely defensible and justifiable. And I also feel, in that situation, it's highly unlikely that he would come back and say, well, I want custody. And even if he did, there would be a whole litany of evidence as to why he would be a horribly unfit father. So that's the picture that I'm trying to paint. I mean, gosh, I don't think we have time to go through the actual legal ramifications.
Right.
I mean, it's a very complex and difficult scenario. And I think actually in fiction, I mean, I'm certainly reading a lot of books lately that deal with women escaping complex and abusive relationships with children in tow, and what exactly their rights are. And from what I understand, it does vary from case to case, but it's horribly sticky and unpleasant, and it goes on for a long time. And there are, women that say, no one believes us, that the system doesn't help us, it doesn't support us. And then there are men that say, well, the system doesn't support us, and we're not being treated well. So honestly, it's so complicated. But in this particular scenario, there are no current within the plot legal ramifications for those actions.
Right. Well, but it's very difficult to sever parental rights, whether married or not. We've come a long way from, when women in the earlier centuries, their children and they themselves became the property of their husbands. They had no individual property when you married, everything became your husband's. So, a woman who was divorcing or trying to get away from an abusive or unhappy marriage didn't have any right to take her children. So we've evolved somewhat, from that. But I also think that courts are really reluctant to sever fathers' rights.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to disentangle yourself if you've had a child with somebody.
Really hard, really difficult. And I think logistically with this plot, that was one of the stickier points. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I could work it in without making it the plot of the story. Do you know what I mean? Because once, that's actually not what the book is about.
No, exactly. No, I know.
It's kind of peripheral, that relationship in some ways. So, but once you introduce all those consequences, then, that would become the bones of the story. So
Sure.
It was quite hard to sort of navigate.
Well, you had to have a reason for her to move to Pine Ridge, taking her 2 children. But when she gets there, it's not about her own relationship. When she gets there, other stuff happens. How much about that do you want to say?
I think that we can say that when she first arrives at Pine Ridge, she thinks it's everything she hoped it would be. So it's remote, it's safe. She feels very protected by the community, but also the landscape. So Pine Ridge is built in almost like the land is like a dish with a lake at the bottom. So she's in a valley. So she feels very held by the landscape itself. And the people seem wonderfully friendly. The owner, the founder of Pine Ridge, Kit, is a very charismatic, very lovely man that she sort of feels a connection with straight away. She just feels like it's full of promise and possibility and safety. But then very quickly, so in the first chapter, the first of a series of quite bizarre events occurs, and she finds a cardboard box on the doorstep of her new digs, and in the box is a dead, mutilated bird. Very creepy, she thinks to herself, but she kind of, passes it off as an isolated incident. Maybe somebody was cleaning the yard and left it there by accident, who knows? And then she begins to explore the village a little bit more. And she, all around the village in this kind of bowl is rainforest. And I don't know if you've ever been to, the Australian bush, or even where I am on the Central Coast, you can drive 20 minutes inland. And you find yourself in this actual forest, with vine creepers and rustling undergrowth, and to my British-born eyes, that's quite scary. It feels very sinister. So she goes for a walk in this rainforest, and she sees symbols, strange, inexplicable symbols carved into the bark of the trees. And then she hears rumors. The kids are talking about rumors of a witch who lives in the woods, who takes kids. So Alex does a little bit of digging, and she finds out that the same sequence of events, and I won't go too much into that sequence of events, there are other things that happen as well. She finds out that the same sequence of events has happened 6 years earlier, the exact same things in the same order, to the family that used to live on the land on which Pine Ridge was built. So the eco-village was built on top of farmland, and that farmland, it was a flower farm. And there was a family who ran that flower farm, and their names were the Kellermans, Renee and Michael Kellerman. And the same sequence of events happened to them, with the result that their 14-year-old son, Gabriel, disappeared off the face of the earth. So then the book becomes about Alex trying to find out exactly what happened in the past to the Kellermans in order to save her children and protect her children in the present.
So ironic that she comes to a place she thinks will be safe, and then there she is suddenly with a different threat, and working to protect it. And that to some degree was true in the safe house as well. So, you obviously, as I said earlier, like the story structure. Are you working on something new?
Yeah, I am. It's actually behind me. I should probably just turn that like that so you can't see it. That's kind of, you can see a little bit of how I plot.
I do,
there
your
with
storyboard
sticky
sort
notes.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working on that. I've got a what I call sort of a mini draft down. So I've been outlining with this one much more than I did with the last one, the last two even. So it's like a very detailed chapter by chapter outline. And I think I probably shouldn't say too much about it, but what I can say is that it's another psychological thriller about a woman who is traveling solo in a van along the coral coast of Western Australia, so between Perth and Exmouth. And she's trying to find out what happened to her sister, who died 12 months earlier doing the same trip. So it's basically about solo female travel, van life, itinerants, and the landscape, the kind of very majestic but quite hostile landscape of Western Australia.
Which is my younger daughter and her husband have traveled in that area. I've only been in the eastern part of Australia. And I would love at some point to actually go down the southern route maybe. And I don't have any reason to go to Ayers Rock. I mean, I live in a place, that's so full of red rock, there's absolutely no point in it. But I think it would be fascinating to go and see that part of Australia. I'm hoping to.
So incredible. I'm actually I'm booked to go in June to do this trip that I'm writing about.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I didn't think I'd be able to when I first started. When the idea first started swirling around, it was really the van and the woman and the premise of her doing this trip that I had. And I called a friend who's actually just done the big lap, the whole lap around Australia with her family in a van. And I called her up and I said, look, this is the story that I want to write. This is the protagonist that I have. And she's in this type of van. Where is that story set? Like, where in Australia would you say is the best place for that story to be set, having been everywhere? And she said, WA, without a doubt. And she said, largely that's because the changes in the landscape are so dramatic, but also it is so hostile in so many ways. And I've done interviews with a lot of solo female travelers who've gone up and down that way. And one of them said to me, sometimes you feel almost held hostage by the land, like it's exploring you, not you're exploring it. You are completely at its whim because you've got this vast desert, you've got these crazy canyons, ancient gorges, waterholes, oceans, reef. She said it's just so extreme that it can be quite eerie, and there's so much danger inherent in it as well. I mean, there's a lot of Australia as a landscape that is just, it's a giant literary device. There's so many ways that you can, get into trouble and hurt yourself. But yeah, so there was a lot of reasons why WA was the right thing. And then when I started researching it, it just, that feeling where the story's running away with you and you're like, oh, this is perfect. It's all slotting in. It's wonderful. I mean, unfortunately, the state borders are closed. I can't go over there, but that's fine. I'll do interviews and I'll watch YouTube videos. And now the state borders are open. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do the trip. I'm going to have to do it. So I'm going to go in June and do it and make sure that everything's authentic.
Would it be different? Would it be different if this were a man making a solo trip?
Yeah, I mean, that's largely what I want to explore. And again, I need to be careful not to say too much about it. But, in looking into solo female travel, it is hugely different for a man. And, when as a woman, as I have been doing very recently, when as a woman you say, I'm going to go on a trip by myself, 99.9% of the time, the first words out of people's mouths are, oh, be careful, be careful. Oh, if a man does it, they go, oh, that sounds great, awesome. And there are lots of kind of obvious reasons for that. But I think when you delve into it, you know, it's actually quite harmful, because that's the story that we tell women over and over again, is the world's not safe for you. You should probably stay home, you know. Whereas, and with, you know, deaths that are reported while traveling, the women spark these huge debates about what can women do to protect themselves from danger, where really it shouldn't be our responsibility to protect ourselves. People should just not be killing women in the first place.
Well, but what, you know, you were talking about the landscape being dangerous, but what you're really saying is that for women, it's people that are dangerous. I mean, because men would face the same dangers in the landscape that women would face, you know.
Sure.
I
mean, I'm exploring a lot of, you know, different things there, and yes, the landscape is very hostile, but I think also I'm also trying to say, why do we think the world is dangerous for women, and why do most people, you know, there are so many female deaths. You know, there was a woman in New Zealand whose Tinder date murdered her. There was a woman up in I think Darwin, and somewhere up in the Northern Territory, who was murdered in her hostel by a man who felt rejected by her. And so there's a whole, you know, then you know, you can't help but also mention oh gosh, her name's completely slipping my mind, the woman really recently who was killed while on a van trip.
You mean here in the United States?
Yes,
Yeah, and it was apparently the boyfriend, because they eventually found him. And, you know, it's interesting that, I mean, not interesting, but, you know, we just had a major subway shooting in New York and all the rest of it. You know, it's almost never women. It's almost never women who are the perpetrators of these kinds of massacres and so forth. And so, but, you know, it's not always women that are specifically targets. It can be anybody that can be targeted, somebody like that, you know, man, woman, child, whatever. That kind of rage, you know, is indiscriminate. So there are different kinds of, you know, hazards that you face. So you're exploring both the dangers of the landscape and the dangers of the people that you would encounter.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. And I mean, you know, it's a whole rabbit hole thing. You can kind of, you start pursuing that, and you find yourself very much in the area of kind of looking at, like you said, you know, it's very rarely women. So why is that? You know, what's going on socially and systemic, and, you know, systemically.
And then we have Cheryl Strayed, and I can't remember the other author, you know, whose idea of, you know, rebooting their lives, in fact, was to go off and travel by themselves, and everybody goes, oh, it's wonderful. So, you know, that'll be really interesting to read. Patrick, why don't we summon you up to see if you have any questions or comments? Here he comes.
Hello. Yeah, let's see here. I'm just checking to make sure if there aren't any questions here. Yeah, I have a question for you. Who are some of your contemporaries in the crime writing community in Australia, which I know they have a very robust community, and a lot of it, I think, still doesn't make its way over to the States. Are there any crime writers that you really like that we might not be aware of?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the crime writing community here, and I have to say, I'm not entirely sure that my books are strictly crime, but still, I've been really embraced by the crime writing community here. They're such a beautiful, warm bunch of people. And there are some absolutely amazing books that are being written at the moment. I have to say that probably my favorites that I don't think are as widely published as they ought to be. Christian White he wrote the phenomenal series Clickbait on Netflix, and he's got, like, let me think, 1, 2, three books, 2 Audible novellas over here, and they're brilliant. They're so brilliant. And I don't know why they're not kind of more widely sold. I don't know why they're not kind of exploding in other parts of the world. That's kind of strange to me. There's a wonderful writer called J.P. Pomare. He's a New Zealand, a Kiwi writer. And I think his writing is completely splendid. I really love, you'll have, obviously, you'll have heard and know Sulari very well, but also Chris Hammer and Candice Fox, who's a wonderful writer. There's also a fantastic writer here called Tim Aliff, who writes brilliant crime set in Sydney. I could go on and on and on. There is some
Jane Harper.
I mean, how can you forget Jane Harper? She is so brilliant. Dervla McTiernan. So her new novel, The Murder Rule, is coming out, I think, next month.
Yep, she'll be here on May 10th, actually.
Wonderful.
No, May 13th. We moved it to Friday the 13th.
Oh, scary.
Sulari Gentle's coming in the fall. Her book comes out in June. And Anna and I are both fond of Michael Robotham, but I don't really think of him as Australian.
No, he's quite kind of international, isn't he? But I mean, Michael, we hung out just recently at the Newcastle Writers Festival, and I know you were so kind when you did that event with him and you let me jump on, and I was like a little fan. I just love his writing so much. And now we kind of get to hang out at writers festivals together, which
I'm
is
really
wonderful.
glad that I've brought you together, because I think it's good to be a fan and then have a chance to actually meet somebody that lives up to the expectation that you have as a fan. And I knew Michael would not disappoint you.
Oh no, he's so wonderful. I really, really, I have so much admiration for him. He's as a writer and as a person.
We had that group of, there were 4 Aussies, I believe, that were here. Sulari, Jock Sarong.
Oh, I love him. He's so great.
That's a great name, by the way.
Isn't it?
Who else was it, Barbara? There were
Emma Viskich.
Yes.
Anna and Dervla and Sulari and Jock, and there was one more man whose name is blanking out on me. They were here in November of 2019 after a mystery conference in Dallas, and they were so funny. I mean, we think of going to the Grand Canyon as like, a 2-day exhibition. They ran up after in the evening, and, saw the Grand Canyon and came back. I was like, wow. I was very impressed.
I was so jealous of that trip. I remember following it on social media going, I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to do it. It looked brilliant.
It'd be nice if you can come and see us. I know Dervla and Sulari are both coming here. I don't think that Anna has any particular plans. There is an Australian publisher called Allen and Unwin, which is a major Australian publisher. They publish the Carrie Greenwoods, whom we haven't mentioned, the Franny Fisher mysteries. And there's a collection of short stories by Carrie coming out in May, which is exciting. If you look at the Allen Unwin catalog online, you can see that there are a lot of really fine Australian writers, not just crime, but regular fiction and nonfiction and children's books. And so you can get a really good idea of what's happening just from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Allen and Unwin are great. They publish incredible books. They're brilliant.
They do.
Yeah, there's loads of them, and there's loads of kind of up and coming ones as well. We've had a bit of an explosion recently. There are just so many wonderful new writers coming out of Australia as well. So yeah, hopefully they make it onto the.
It's great to see you building a more native community, because for a long time Australia literary scene was largely sailed over in ships from Britain. And books were incredibly expensive as a result, because they were, they came in by ship. They weren't locally produced. And now I'm seeing that Australia is doing, and New Zealand to some degree too. I've traveled a lot in both countries, and I know the sticker shock I had when it was like $35 for a paperback in Australia. And I went, what?
It's still expensive.
Yeah, it is, but it's just great to see more, more native writing, not just Richard Flanagan and all, but other important writers.
Oh, we're definitely branching out. Sorry.
Tim Winton I'm thinking about, and
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
Carey, and there's loads.
Yeah. A lot.
Gary
That's great.
Disher.
Yeah, Gary Disher. Fantastic.
He's an old timer. He's written an awful lot.
Now
of
he is, yeah.
Yeah.
What about Peter Temple? Did he pass away?
Yes.
He did.
Yes,
Yeah, I
he
like
did.
those books. The Jack.
Yeah. He was a very fine writer, but unfortunately, he did die. So
Yeah.
it was really too bad. And years ago, Simon and Schuster, one of the last books that I'm trying to think of his name, Michael Korda, as an editor did. The only time I ever heard from Michael Korda, I got a handwritten note from him. There was an absolutely terrific novel. And it was the only book, as far as I can tell, this guy ever wrote. And I really, really loved it. It had some relation to the Aboriginal communities. You know, Australia has a difficult colonial history with its settlers in the same way that the America and Canada do too. You know, they were all people there before, and those relationships are difficult. Were difficult. Anyway, I wish I could remember the name of the book now that I've droned on about it, but I can't.
There was that guy that wrote a really terrific book. It was kind of like a Cormac McCarthy in Australia. Paul, is it Howarth?
Yes, there is Paul Howarth. He's written more than one book, but yeah, he's very good.
Really good.
But he's not the guy I'm thinking of.
I should probably mention Hayley Scrivener as well, who she's about to release a book called Dirt Town, and that's created a bit of a fuss over in the UK as well. So look out for Hayley Scrivener, Dirt Town. And there's another book called Wake by Shelley Burr. I haven't read either of these, by the way, personally, but that's that one. I think the Dagger, over the UK Dagger. So keep an eye out for that one as well. Shelley Burr, Hayley Scrivener.
Great. That's
Hot tip coming out of Australia.
Love it. It's always good to have tips. I have said for the last year or two that I think the Australian crime wave is rising, and as we're all kind of oversaturated with Scandi noir and Nordic noir and all that, I think, Australia is really coming on. So
yeah,
great to see. Anything else, Patrick, before we let Anna go?
Let's see. Let's see here. Nope, not yet.
Well, Anna, it's been a real pleasure to spend time with you again. I loved meeting you last year, and I was happy that we had an encore with Mr. Rabathan.
So it was so nice.
See you next time. And, if you're able to travel to the US, by all means, come see us.
As soon as it becomes a kind of a feasible thing for me to do, I will be there. I'm very sort of envious and of authors who are now starting to get back on those international tours. I would just love it. So yeah, and first place I'll be coming is to see you, Barbara. I would love it.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you watching, enjoy the rest of your evening here in the United States. Good night.